Monster Hunter World Iceborne's endgame can be a challenge for the best of hunters, but with the right weapons and builds, even endgame tasks can easily be achieved. I'm Darcblade and we're back with even more endgame builds for Monster Hunter World Iceborne. In this episode we're going to be taking a look at endgame builds for the Switch Axe. The Switch Axe is a unique weapon, able to morph into two forms. The starting axe form allows for long-range, hard-hitting attacks but are quite slow, whilst the sword form allows for longer, stronger combos but at a shorter distance. Managing the switch gauge is also key to success with the Switch Axe, which will power up the sword form, allowing you to deal even more damage. The builds I use tend to focus on DPS more than anything else, but a few of them also contain unique aspects such as health regen, as well as quality of life skills to assist the shortcomings of the Switch Axe. Now, a disclaimer for this series though, these builds are aimed for endgame hunters who have completed the story of Monster Hunter World Iceborne and have access to most or all the armors in the game. A large jewel collection is also desired, but you can always swap out jewels here and there if you do not have what is shown in the videos. So the first build I use is the Master's Touch Switch Axe build. This is a DPS focused build that utilises the Master's Touch skill, preventing any sharpness loss when we crit a monster. Thus it's a high DPS build thanks to the high affinity we have, and it's also a build that doesn't really have to worry about losing sharpness. So for this build you'll need the Kaiser Crown Beta, the Rex Royal Mail Beta, Kaiser Van Braces Beta, Kaiser Coil Beta, and the Garuga Grease Beta. I'm also using the Challenger Charm 4, and for my weapon I'm using Ruinous Light. This is the Runa Nergigante Switch Axe. This has an affinity increase augmentation, health regen augmentation, and then an augmentation of your choice, to which I've gone for a defense increase augmentation. As for the mantles and specialist tools, these are down to personal preference, but with the Switch Axe I tend to prefer the Temporal Mantle and Rocksteady Mantle, as it allows you to latch onto a monster to perform your zero-sum discharge move without being knocked off should a monster perform an attack while you're doing it. Now when it comes to the jewels, remember as I said, depending on what you have access to, you may have to swap out some here and there. But for this build I've gone for Challenger Jewels to max out the Agitator skill, Vitality Jewels for some health boost, Expert Jewels to max out the Crit Eye skill, Critical Jewels to max out the Crit Boost skill, a Tenderizer Jewel to max out the Weakness Exploit skill, Attack Jewels to get the attack boost to at least level 4, Enhancer Jewels for the Power Prolonger skill, and finally Protection Jewels to provide us some Divine Blessing. So if you've done what I've done here, you should have a build with 150 health, 100 stamina, which would be 200 health and 150 stamina when you're on a hunt and taking all your relevant consumables. You have an attack of 1110 with maxed out white sharpness. You have 55% base affinity, which can easily be 100% so long as you're attacking monster weak points that have been tenderized first through clutch claw attacks, or the agitator skill has been kicked in. You also have a dragon elemental rating of 210 with high elder seal, and you'll have power files. As for your defense, you have a decent defense of 928 that's strong against fire, thunder and dragon, but unfortunately weak to ice and water. Now when it comes to the skills, you'll have Critical Eye at level 7. Critical Eye basically increases the base affinity rating of a build. You have Agitator level 5, which is a wonderful buff that kicks in when a monster becomes enraged, increasing your raw attack as well as your affinity. You have Attack Boost at level 4, which can be potentially level 6 when you're wearing your mantles. Attack Boost increases the raw damage of a build, and at level 4 or above, it also provides you a bonus 5% extra affinity. You have Health Boost level 3, allowing us to get our maximum health to that level 200. You have Crit Boost level 3, which increases the damage of our hits, so long as those hits crit a monster. But this only increases the raw portion of the attack, it won't do anything for the elemental portion. You have Weakness Exploit level 3, which is a skill that increases our affinity so long as we're attacking monster weak points. And should these weak points be tenderized through clutch claw attacks first, this increase to our affinity can be potentially up to 50%. You have Power Prolonger level 3, which for the Switch Axe allows the sword gauge to stay powered up for longer periods. This applies to both powering up the axe form as well as the sword form. Anyway, you have Blast Attack level 2, which is a byproduct of the gear we're wearing. It's not useful on this build whatsoever unless you were to swap out the weapon and use a blast weapon, which would increase the blast rating and build up of that said weapon. Anyway, you have Heat Guard level 1, another byproduct of the armour. Heat Guard prevents any damage when we're in hot areas such as the lava zones, in the Guiding Lands or Elder's Recess. You also have Latent Power level 1, which again is another byproduct but can still be useful. Latent Power is another buff that kicks in when you've been fighting a monster for a set amount of time, or you take a certain amount of damage from a monster during a hunt. When this buff kicks in, you'll receive bonus affinity as well as reduced stamina consumption. And then finally for the skill, you have Divine Blessing level 1, which can be potentially level 3 when we're wearing our Rocksteady Mantle. Divine Blessing is a buff that allows us to take reduced damage when we take a hit from a monster, adding to a build's survivability. And as we will be taking hits when we're using the Rocksteady Mantle, having Divine Protection when we are using that specialist tool comes in useful. Anyway, finally for the set bonus you have the Teastra's technique, Master's Touch, which prevents any sharpness loss on our weapon when we crit a monster. So you shouldn't really have to sharpen your weapon whatsoever during a hunt, as this build does already have high affinity. So there you have it, that's the Master's Touch build. But of course every build comes with pros and cons. The biggest pro for this build is its high DPS output. Thanks to having high affinity, agitator, attack boost, crit boost, power prolonger and latent power, it all adds to the build's overall DPS. Also, it's a build that has reduced sharpness loss, potentially no sharpness loss whatsoever. This is all thanks to the high affinity coupled with Master's Touch. And the final pro is, despite this being a dragon based weapon, it can be pretty much used against any monster. This is thanks to the Runa no Gigante switch axe having such high raw attack and low dragon attack. Yes, if the monster is weak to the dragon element, then this build is going to be even stronger, but if not, you can still use this against pretty much any monster and hunt it fairly comfortably. But every build has cons. Unfortunately, when it comes to cons, the biggest one is this build doesn't work with any weapon that requires handicraft. If you did want to swap the weapon out to another one that can potentially get to purple sharpness, then you're going to have to make some sacrifices to add some handicraft to the build. And the final con is, unfortunately, this is a jewel heavy build. It does rely on a lot of the rarer jewels out there, so it may not be one for newcomers who have entered Endgame straight away. But regardless, this is a strong DPS build for the switch axe, and like I said, it can be used to comfortably hunt pretty much any monster in the game. But anyway, let's move on to the second build, which is the health regeneration build. This build is a more survival and defensive focused build, but it shouldn't be counted out for DPS either. So for this build you'll need the Fell Shroud Helm Beta, the Fell Shroud Mel Beta, the Rex Royal Braces Alpha, the Ruinous Coil Beta and the Ruinous Greaves Beta. I'm also using a Venom Charm 4, and for my weapon I'm using the Golden Crescent, which is the Golden Rathian switch axe. This has an affinity increase augmentation, health regen augmentation and then a status effect up augmentation. As for the jewels, you've got a few to play around with here. Firstly, I've gone for Tenderizer jewels to max out the weakness exploit. I've then gone for Earplug jewels to max out the Earplug skill, Recovery jewels to max out the Recovery speed skill, Medicine jewels for the Recovery up skill, Protection jewels for Divine Blessing, a Flawless jewel to max out peak performance, and then finally for the jewels on the mantles, I've gone for Expert jewels, although these are down to personal preference. So if you've done what I've done here, you should have a build with 150 health, 100 stamina, which will be 200 health and 150 stamina when you're on a hunt and taking all your relevant consumables. You'll have an attack of 1110 again, with a decent chunk of white sharpness. You have 35% base affinity, which can be potentially 85 so long as you're attacking monster weak points that have been tenderized through clutch claw attacks first. You have a poison rating of 560 with power files again, and you have a strong defense of 929 that is strong against water, ice and fire, but unfortunately weak to thunder and dragon. As for the skills, you have Earplugs at level 5. Earplugs is a wonderful quality of life skill that prevents any reaction to any monster roars. As when you do latch onto a monster to perform a zero-sum discharge, roars can often be your bane and knock you off before you finish the move. Anyway, you'll also have attack boost level 4, poison attack level 4. Poison attack is a skill that increases the poison rating and build up of this build. This is thanks to the charm we're wearing, but you can potentially swap this out if you want for something else. For example, if you're using a different weapon with a different element that can get to purple sharpness, you could swap out the poison charm, drop poison attack, and instead get some handicraft to increase your weapon sharpness to purple. But anyway, you'll also have health boost level 3, recovery up level 3. Recovery up is a skill that increases the amount of health we recover when we perform healing methods or drink healing potions and such. You have recovery speed level 3, which increases the rate at which our health regenerates naturally over time. This is normally only for when our health bar has a portion of red health on it, but thanks to the set bonus we're using, this can apply to the entire health bar. You'll also have Weakness Exploit level 3, Peak Performance level 3. Peak Performance is a buff that kicks in when we have full health, increasing our raw attack. You have Divine Blessing level 3, Dragon Attack level 1, which is byproduct of the gear. It's not really needed on this build whatsoever. Anyway, you have Critical Eye level 1, which can be potentially level 3 when we're wearing our mantles. And when it comes to the set bonuses, you have two of them. First is the Vow Soul Vein Super Recovery. This is the set bonus that allows us to recover over time our entire health bar, not just the red portion of health. So this build basically has a constant heal over time effect going on with it. You also have the Nergigante's Ambition Hasten Recovery, which allows us to restore our health when we're attacking a monster, and this does work in conjunction with the health regen augmentation as well as the recovery up skill, adding to even more health regen and thus survival. So there we have it, that is the health regen build I use, but like I said, as always, builds have pros and cons. When it comes to the health regen build, the biggest pro is that the build has a lot of survivability thanks to the sheer amount of health regen options it has available to it. Thanks to the health regen augmentation, hasten recovery, super recovery, recovery up, and recovery speed, it means that rarely should you have to sheathe your weapon and take a potion to heal. On top of that, the build also has a fair few quality of life skills. Thanks to having earplugs, divine blessing and health boost is all going to add and make a hunt feel a little bit more easier than it would be. And on top of that, finally, the build, despite not being damage focused, it can still dish out a decent amount of damage. This is thanks to the attack boost, as well as weakness exploit and peak performance, and on top of that the poison attack, which will allow for some unseen damage over time on a monster. This build shouldn't be counted off as weak when it comes to damage. But there are cons. Unfortunately, this build does have sharpness issues, especially if you wanted to use a different weapon, but like I said, you could swap out the poison attack for handicraft if you so desire. And the other con is, unfortunately, this build is lower on the affinity scale than most builds I use. It doesn't have 100% affinity, and it can't benefit from skills like crit boost and such. But regardless, if you're looking for a build to take into a hunt and get it done comfortably, this is definitely one to consider, and I would highly recommend it. But anyway, let's move on to the third build, which is the true critical element build. This is our elemental DPS build that makes use of weapons that have the power element files. So for this build, you'll need the Silver Soul Helm Beta, the Silver Soul Mail Beta, Silver Soul Braces Beta, Silver Soul Coil Beta, and the Garuga Greaves Beta. I'm also using a Shock Charm 5, although this can be replaced to match whatever element you want to use. And for my weapon, I'm using the Archbeast Kirin. This is the Kirin Switch Axe, which has a health regen augmentation and then an elemental up augmentation. As for the jaws, you've got a few to play around with here. Firstly, I've gone for a Bolt Jaw to max out the thunder attack of this build. You can of course replace this if you are using a different element. I've then gone for Tenderizer Jaws for weakness exploit, Expert Jaws for some critical eye, Enhancer Jaws for the power prolonger skill, Vitality Jaws for some health boost, Jumping Jaws for the evade extender, and then finally on our mantles I've gone for Destroyer and Protection Jaws. So if you've done what I've done here, you should have a build with 150 health, 100 stamina, which will be 200 health and 150 stamina. When you're on a hunt and taking all your relevant consumables, you have a raw attack of 893 with a decent chunk of white sharpness. You have 25% base affinity, which can be 75% when you're on a hunt and attacking monster weak points that have been tenderized through clutch claw attacks first. You have an elemental rating of 860 with power element files, and you'll have a strong defense of 937 that is strong against fire and dragon, but unfortunately weak to the other elements. As for the skills, you have Thunder Attack level 6, this increases the thunder rating and damage of a build, and of course if you wanted to use a different weapon with a different element, charm, and that single elemental jaw, you can replace this with Fire Attack, Water Attack, and it will have the same effect for that element. I've then got Critical Eye at level 5, Windproof at level 3. Windproof is a byproduct of the gear we're wearing. It's not the most essential skill, it just helps resist minor wind attacks. You have Health Boost level 3, Critical Boost level 3. Remember, like I said, Critical Boost only increases the raw damage of an attack when we crit a monster. It does nothing for the elemental portion. Anyway, you have Weakness Exploit level 3, Power Prolonger level 3, Slinger Capacity level 3. This again is a byproduct of the gear we're wearing, but allows us to equip more slinger ammunition. You have Evade Extender level 2. This is a quality of life skill for the Switch Axe. One of the Switch Axe's major cons is its mobility. It's not the most maneuverable of weapons, and with Evade Extender it allows you to roll longer distances and counter that slow movement. And then finally, when it comes to the mantles, you'll have Part Breaker level 2, which allows us to break monster body parts more easily, and you'll have Divine Blessing at level 2. As for the set bonuses, you'll have the Silver Rathalos Essence. For wearing 2 pieces of the armor, you'll get Slinger Ammo Secret, which is kind of wasted on this build. Slinger Ammo Secret allows us to get the Slinger Capacity skill from level 3 to a potential level 5, but we haven't made use of it with this build. And you'll have True Critical Element, which increases the elemental damage of a hit when we crit a monster. So think of it like crit boost, but for the elemental damage of a weapon. And True Critical Element increases the damage even more than the base crit element. But there we have it, that is the elemental build I tend to use with the Switch Axe. Now of course there are pros and cons. The biggest pro for this build is its high elemental damage, thanks to having a maxed out elemental rating of whatever weapon you're using, combined with True Critical Element, as well as the affinity based skills. Although we weren't quite able to get to 100%, I'm sure you could drop maybe the Jumping Jaws for Expert Jaws if you wanted to max it out a little bit more, but nonetheless this build still is very high on the elemental damage output. On top of that, the build also comes with some decent quality of life skills, thanks to having Evade Extender, Power Prolonger, Health Boost, Windproof. It all should make a hunt feel a little bit more easier. And on top of that, the final pro is that this is a build that pretty much can work with any weapon. All you have to do is swap out the weapon, charm, and that single elemental jaw, and you can make use of any of the elements out there. But unfortunately there are cons. This build can struggle if you were to use a weapon that needs handicraft, as there is no handicraft on this build, but you could make sacrifices elsewhere, but it's gonna reduce your potential DPS or quality of life skills. And the final con is, unfortunately, this build can't be used universally against every monster out there. you're going to have to take into account a monster's elemental weaknesses and counter it with the right element. If you're doing a multi-monster hunt, it means you're going to have to go back to camp and make changes. So it's not a build that you can just use for the entirety of a multi-monster hunt, unfortunately. But there we have it. Regardless of the cons, this build is still strong, especially, like I said, if you're taking into account a monster's elemental weaknesses. Should you counter a monster with the right elements, then this build will rip through them like butter, making it a strong DPS build. Which brings us on to our fourth build, which is a quicker build known as the buff body build. This makes use of the buff body armor, which is found from the event quest Muscle Monkey Madness, turning your hunter into a sexy bodybuilder. Now the main goal behind this build is increasing our raw attack to as much as possible. So for this build I'm using the Golden Loon Helm Beta, the buff chest alpha, buff arms alpha, buff waist alpha, and the buff legs alpha. I'm also using a handicraft charm 4, and for my weapon I'm using the Undying Light, which is the REGEN switch axe. This has an affinity increase augmentation, health regen augmentation, and then an augmentation of your choice, to which I've gone for a defense increase augmentation. As for your jewels, you've only really got a few to play around with here, to which I've gone for vitality jewels to max out the health boost, handicraft jewel to max out the handicraft skill, a sharp jewel for protective polish, expert jewels to max out the critical eye skill, and jumping jewels to max out the evade extender. So if you've done what I've done here, you should have a build with 150 health, 100 stamina, which will be 200 health and 150 stamina when you're on a hunt, taking all your relevant consumables. You have an attack of 1211 with maxed out white sharpness. You have 40% base affinity with a thunder rating of 120 with power files, and you have a strong defense of 938 that is strong against fire but unfortunately weak to the other elements. As for the skills, you have attack boost level 7, critical eye level 7, handicraft level 5. Handicraft is a skill that increases the sharpness of whatever weapon we're using. You have agitator level 5, heroics level 5. Heroics is a skill that increases your attack power and defense when your health drops to 35% or lower. So the more health we lose, the stronger this build gets. Anyway, you have health boost level 3, evade extender level 3, fortify level 1, a byproduct of the gear, but is useful. Every time you faint, you come back with increased health and defense rating up to a maximum of 2 times. You have resuscitate level 1, which again is another byproduct of the gear. Resuscitate is a skill that improves our evasion and also gives us reduced stamina depletion when we're afflicted with an abnormal status effect such as poison or fire blight. And then finally you have protective polish. Protective polish is a buff that you can apply to your sharpness gauge, preventing any sharpness loss for a small duration of time after you've sharpened your weapon. So there we have it. That is the buff body build. To be honest, it's nice to see that every skill we are using in this build is maxed out, which does bring a smile to my face. But there are pros and cons to this build. The biggest pro to this build is its high raw DPS, able to bring down monsters quite quickly thanks to the high raw attack rating we have. This also means that we can pretty much get away using this build against any monster, thanks to the thunder rating being so low and the raw attack so high. Of course, if the monster is weak to thunder, then this build will be even stronger. But anyway, the other pros are that this build doesn't actually need a lot of jewels. It's not a jewel heavy build. Even if you don't have the jewels that are shown in this video, you can pretty much get yourself a similar build. And on top of that, the third pro is this build looks damn sexy. Whether you're male or female, it's going to show off the physical form of your hunter. But unfortunately there are cons to this build. The biggest con is unfortunately this build is locked behind an event quest. The main armor, the buff body armor, is locked behind the event quest Muscle Monkey Madness, which has players taking on 2 REGEN in the arena. And because event quests aren't available all the time, it means that if you haven't completed this event quest yet and have access to the buff body armor set, you may have to wait till it comes around again. And the final con, which is only really a minor one, is that unfortunately this build is weak to most elements. You can counter this, like I said, by using various elemental mantles, but it's just something to be aware of. Nonetheless, this is a strong DPS build, boasting some of the highest raw attack in the game. Yes, it does miss out on a few raw attack skills like peak performance, but nonetheless this build is very powerful. Which brings us on to our fifth and final build, which is the True GATA'S Guiding Lands build. This is a build that is focused on farming the Guiding Lands, whilst making use of the True GATA'S set bonus found on the Safi'Jiiva armor set. So for this build you'll need the Safi'Jiiva Helm Beta, Nail Beta, Braces Beta, Coil Beta and Greaves Beta. I'm also using a Master's Charm 5, and for my weapon I'm using the Golden Crescent, which is the Golden Raffian switch axe. This has an affinity increase augmentation, health regen augmentation and then a status effect up augmentation. As for the mantles, these are important with this build. You need to normally go with the glider mantle as well as one of the various elemental mantles. Basically you want the mantles that have the longest uptime and the shortest cooldown, so you can be rotating the mantles constantly during a hunt with the aim of having a mantle constantly active during the entirety of a hunt. But anyway, when it comes to the jaws, you've got a fair few to play around with, to which I've gone for Tenderizer jaws for weakness exploit, Enhancer jaws for the power prolonger skill, Medicine jaws for the recovery up skill, Expert jaws for some critical eye, a critical jaw to max out the crit boost skill, Vitality jaws for the health boost skill, Protection jaws for some divine blessing, and a maintenance jaw for the tool specialist skill. You'll then want to take the jaws that give you the specific guiding lands required skills, such as Destroyer jaws for the part breaker skill and a geology jaw for the geologist skill. So if you've done what I've done here, you should have a build with 150 health, 100 stamina, which will be 200 health and 150 stamina when you're on a hunt and taking all your relevant consumables. You have an attack of 1250 with white sharpness. You have 65% base affinity, which can easily be 100% so long as you're attacking monster weak points that have been tenderized through clutch claw attacks first. You have a poison rating of 420 with power files, and you'll have a very strong defense of 936 that is strong against thunder, neutral against fire and dragon, but unfortunately weak to water and ice. Although these can be countered, like I said, with the various elemental mantles we'll be wearing. As for the skills, you have critical eye level 7, health boost level 3, recovery up level 3, critical boost level 3, weakness exploit level 3, power prolonger level 3, coalescence level 2, a byproduct of the armor we're wearing, but it's still useful. Every time we remove a blight from our hunter, it gives us increased raw attack, elemental attack, and abnormal status effect increase. So it increases the raw attack and poison attack of this build. Anyway, you also have defense boost level 1, again another byproduct of the armor we're wearing, which increases the defense rating of this build. You have part breaker level 1, which can be potentially level 3 when we're wearing our mantles, and as you should have the mantles on pretty much for the entirety of the hunt, we can pretty much consider part breaker at being level 3. Like I said earlier, part breaker allows us to break monster body parts more easily, and in the guiding lands it allows us to knock off the monster materials we farm from this endgame area more easily. You have Fortify level 1, Divine Blessing level 1, which can be potentially level 3 when we're wearing certain mantles. You have Geologist level 1, which is a vital skill for the Guiding Lands, as it allows you to loot the monster materials broken off from a monster in the Guiding Lands twice instead of just once, at least from the high tier monsters. You also have Tool Specialist level 1, which reduces the cooldown on our specialized tools and thus our mantles. This should allow the two mantles we are using, the glider mantle combined with an elemental mantle, to be in unison and in sync with one another. So once one wears off, the other one should be off cooldown. And then finally, for the set bonus, you'll have the Shara Ishvalda Divinity True Gaia's Veil. This is a buff that kicks in whenever we're wearing a mantle, which provides us with Tremor Resistance level 3, preventing all reaction to tremor attacks, Earplugs level 5, which makes us immune to monster rules, you have Maximum Windproof, which prevents any reactions to wind attacks, and finally you have maxed out Flinch 3, which prevents any reaction to minor damage or knockbacks from allies. So there you have it, that is the build that I tend to use in the Guiding Lands with the Switch Axe. Now of course with every build there are pros and cons. The biggest pro for this build is the True Gaia's Veil buff. So long as you're managing your mantles okay, it means it provides you a ton of quality of life skills, making for easier hunts. On top of that, this is a build that also comes with all the essential Guiding Land skills, such as Geologist, Part Breaker and Fortify. And finally, this is a build that can be used pretty much against any monster. Rarely is a monster completely immune to the poison element, which means that we don't have to keep constantly go back to camp and change out the gear to something that will counter the monster we're trying to hunt. But unfortunately there is one major con for this build, and that is a build that relies on mantles, especially mantles that have been upgraded. If you haven't unlocked the mantles yet, or unlocked the advanced versions of these mantles that allow you to socket jewels, then this build isn't going to work for you. But regardless, if you're looking for a comfy build to use in the Guiding Lands that can take on hunts there quite easily, even against the tier 3 tempered monsters, this is one I would strongly recommend for the Switch Axe. So there we have it, those are some of the endgame builds that I use for the Switch Axe in Monster Hunter World Iceborne. Now of course there are more builds to come, and as I always say, you don't have to use what I've shown here, these are just the builds that I like to use for the Switch Axe. But until next time, I've been Darcblade, bringing the endgame builds I use for the Switch Axe in Monster Hunter World Iceborne. Hope you enjoyed the video, thanks for watching, subscribe and like for more.